Long time no see. So this is a video I never really wanted to ever be making, but probably from the title you'll get an idea as to why I've not been posting anything in the past 18 months or so now. As melancholy as this video will be for me to make, I do hope that by making it I'll get to remember some fun N64 memories from my childhood involving my dad, and going over my experiences might help you remember some of yours from way back in the day. Now, I was going to save this until the end of the video, but whilst I have your attention now, I just want to say that if you're ever feeling so low that you're thinking of doing something stupid to yourself, then please don't. Pick up the phone to anyone and just talk about how you're feeling. Go to your nearest hospital, ring the Samaritans or whatever they're called in your country, and just get the help that you need. Men especially, please don't suffer in silence thinking that you'll get through it on your own. Reach out and do get some professional help. So look, you're here for N64 related stuff, and so that's what I'm going to hit you with. For today's video I'll be sharing my N64 memories that involve my dad in some weird and wonderful ways. And if you've been around here long enough you may have already heard some of them, but hey, I'm in a reminiscing mood and so here goes. Probably the best place to start is where it all began. Well, where it started in terms of the N64 anyway. My parents worked a lot when we were kids, but Christmas was always a time that they pushed the boat out, and I can't really remember a Christmas where I wasn't blown away by all the cool stuff that I got. That year I still had a PlayStation, and I remember this so vividly because I still can't understand how I didn't realise what was going on. So it must have been around 3 days before Christmas because it was my parents' last working day before their Christmas break. I was playing on the PlayStation early in the morning, and I'm quite sure that it was Nuclear Strike 2 for some reason, but I digress. So my parents came into the bedroom and say that their work colleague hasn't been able to get his son any presents for Christmas because he was so broke. And so my dad said that he would give his work colleague our PlayStation so that his kid would have something to open up on Christmas morning. So my dad asked me to box up really nice and pack everything all the way perfectly, all of the games, the consoles and the accessories, so that he could take it to work with him that morning. Now, I don't really know what I was thinking, but I don't even remember being upset or even thinking that during the Christmas school break I wouldn't even have a games console to be playing on to be able to maximise my gaming time on. I even remember wiping the memory card and cleaning everything before putting it into the boxes so it looked like the kid was getting a brand new console instead of a used one, because generally I did used to look after my game stuff when I was younger. Back in those days there used to be a lot of good stuff on TV around Christmas, and I had a couple of friends who lived nearby, and so it didn't even seem like the end of the world to me. I do remember being slightly annoyed though because my birthday is only a few weeks before Christmas, and I remember having just purchased some new PS1 games, but I can't remember exactly which ones they were. So it gets to Christmas morning, and as a general rule of thumb this is how Christmas used to go down in my household. We would all wake up fairly early in the morning, and from that moment on my dad would do all that he could to annoy us by delaying opening of the presents. He did it in a nice way, I think, to savour every moment out of the day, and to be honest, you know, as you're a kid you just want to get on with opening all of your new cool things, but for adults it's all the anticipation and seeing the excitement build up, so, you know, give him credit where it's due. So my dad would always go through the same routine. He'd start off by lighting the fire, he'd then put on a Nat King Cole Christmas type CD, and then my mum would make a full English breakfast which myself and my siblings would nearly choke on, trying to eat it as quickly so we could get the actual present opening experience moving along. Then eventually at like 10 or 11 AM we could finally get on to opening our presents. Now, because my brother and I are only about 13 months apart in terms of age, and we had similar interests like basketball, wrestling and video games, we'd normally have our own presents, but every year we'd always get one big joint present to share. So we opened all of our presents, and then my brother and I would always have to open the big present last, almost like some kind of special attraction that my parents would get a kick out of. So this year at that time and at that moment, my dad came and he was like, okay, well I'm glad you enjoyed opening your presents boys, so we're now going to go outside and rake the leaves off the lawn whilst your sister and mum start working on Christmas dinner. It's fair to say that my brother and I were raging, and I mean like we were fuming angry on that Christmas day, because of all days we were being told to go and do some bloody gardening, do some chores. So we went to our bedroom to get changed into warmer clothes because it was really cold outside, and we were cussing under our breaths about how annoyed we were. So we went to the garage and to get the tools and things that we'd need to start raking these leaves, and we were still so mad, and we were talking to each other about how unfair this all was. Then we get outside of the garage, and my dad, my mum and my sister are all standing there smiling, and that only made me and my brother more angry because we were just like fuming, thinking that they were making fun of us. And then my dad was like, "Well, do you not like your new bikes?" So we looked back into the garage, and because we'd been so angry with rage, neither of us had seen or even realised that as we went into the garage to get the tools, there were actually 2 brand new mountain bikes literally in the middle of the empty garage. So naturally we were both super excited and happy, and we did see the funny side, and our attitude did change pretty quickly. And it made sense to us that we'd now received our big, or main present as we used to call it. Or did we? So we go back into the house, and under the Christmas tree there's now a few more boxes hidden at the back of it. And so my dad says, "You're going to have to open your main present now." And even then I didn't get a hint that we were getting the N64 despite it having been on our Christmas wish list. So boom, we open up the boxes, and it's a Nintendo 64, and we had 4 games, which were Shadows of the Empire, FIFA 64, Doom 64, and I always seem to forget the other game that we had, but I'm sure I've mentioned it somewhere on the channel here before. Now even though we were super excited, I remember my dad saying that he tried to get his Goldeneye instead of Doom 64 for weeks, but everywhere in the town where we lived had been sold out of Goldeneye, but he hopes that we didn't mind. Now don't get me wrong, I would have loved to have had Goldeneye, but at the same time having 4 brand new games and a new games console to play was truly amazing. We also had a third-party Gamester LMP controller, which I guess the guy at the store threw in because they are literally the worst N64 controller ever made, and I actually remember the top of the thumbstick snapping off within a few days. That Christmas was probably my favourite ever Christmas memory as a kid, and probably no surprises that it still plays a part in my life even to this day. So I was a bit of an addict when it came to Diddy Kong racing. It's still to this day one of my favourite all-time games, as many of you will know, and so when I was at my peak addiction I remember I would play it as much as possible, as I was determined to unlock TT as a playable character. So my dad used to work different shifts, and so he would sometimes get the chance to race me in multiplayer, but our once close contests were starting to become more and more one-sided as I learned to master the game's mechanics. So my dad gets home from a night shift one time at like 8 AM in the morning, and my brother and sister had already left for school by this point. Because I wanted to squeeze every moment I could into playing the game, I didn't plan on setting off until much later, and then literally running all the way to school from my house so not to be late. My dad gets home, and I was kind of expecting him to be annoyed with me for not going to school, but to my surprise he watched me doing a couple of races as he knew I was getting closer to unlocking TT. Then he just turns around to me and says, "Do you want to stay off school today and play all day with me on Diddy Kong Racing? And if you do, just don't tell your mum." So naturally I was never going to turn down that offer, and so for pretty much the entire day we were either taking it in turns trying to beat the TT challenge times, or racing head to head in multiplayer. We didn't even change the different games, we literally just played it until we unlocked TT, and then my dad was like, "I need to get some sleep before my next shift." It's strange that literally missing one day of school can be so memorable, but I'll always remember how cool it was seeing my dad ring in sick for me and then smashing Diddy Kong Racing for hours on end afterwards. Now this one's more of a family affair than just a specific memory of my dad and I, but I remember one Saturday afternoon we're all at home and my dad saw me and my brother playing Snowball Kids, and him casually asking if it was 4-player, as it looked very similar in style to Mario Kart with having power-ups and that kind of thing. He then jumped into a game and really enjoyed it, and said, "Let's do this tonight, let's give this a really good gaming session, and so here's some cash to go and get some extra controllers," and he said to get the proper official Nintendo controllers and not the third-party cheap ones, so everyone would have the same type of controller, so no one could say there was any bias or cheating on it. I think that night my sister and her boyfriend came over, and so there was like 5 of us doing a loser drops off tournament on it. And I remember this happening a couple of times in the months after that and it being so much fun. I remember that when we heard that Snowball Kids 2 wouldn't be coming out in the UK, that he was probably just as disappointed with that as we were. Now we were always big Star Wars fans in my house, and especially Star Wars games had been really popular throughout the console generations. In particular, I remember playing Dark Forces on PC way back in the day with my dad, and him also completing Rebel Assault on the Panasonic 3DO when we had one of those. So anything Star Wars related was always going to be cool. And so when Rogue Squadron was launched and I'd seen the amazing reviews in magazines, I knew that it was a game that my dad would also really want to play, because he'd loved the X-Wing vs TIE Fighter games and all of those dogfighting masterpieces. So my dad took me to the local game shop where I used to go all the time, and I remember having something like £20 from some special occasion, maybe, I don't know, as a birthday or seeing some relative. And so whilst I was there, I also purchased the expansion pack, which had been out for a couple of weeks at that point, because I'd seen the graphical improvements it gave the game in the magazine reviews when they showed side-by-side comparisons. So when I got back into the car, my dad was actually pretty annoyed with me because he said it just sounded like another gimmick and it wouldn't actually change anything in the game, and it was just a way to make more money off kids who don't know any better. Now of course he didn't read the magazines like I did, so he hadn't seen the bump in resolution it gave the game, and perhaps Rogue Squadron is one of the best looking examples of what the expansion pack can do. So to prove my point, as any teenager tries to do, I remember booting up the game for the first time without the expansion pack and letting my dad play the first level, then taking it out and installing the expansion pack and letting him do that first level all over again. He was legit blown away by the bump in the visual quality and said it was just a shame it didn't work on every game, because for only £20 or so, whatever the expansion pack cost back then, it was actually a really cool piece of kit to own. A much shorter memory this time, but I still remember this vividly. So for some reason one weekend we had picked up Vally. I think it was a quiet period for new releases around then, and so it's more of a case of wanting something new to play than anything else, but we actually both got quite into it, and I casually mentioned that in the N64 magazine for months they'd mentioned it was quite realistic, and it was actually more fun to play with one of the N64 steering wheels. Now this comment planted a seed in my dad's head, because the next thing you know, he stuffed 50 quid in my hand and sent me up to Dave's Consoles and Games in Chorley to buy the only steering wheel which was in stock in the town where I lived. Now unfortunately it was the Gamester steering wheel, which wasn't actually as bad as the aforementioned controller they made, but you know, being in a small town you have to take what you can actually get. So by the time I got home, my dad had moved the huge bulky CRT TV into the kitchen and put it on our counter. We then set up the steering wheel on the counter too and played the game for hours. Now as strange as it seems, I think that was literally the only time we played together using that steering wheel, because you know, the sight of that setup that we made on that afternoon and trying to replicate an arcade experience in the kitchen was so surreal. Bit of a change in pace now, as way back in the day my brother was quite sick and spent months in hospital having various tests and surgeries on him, trying to help him get better. Now when my parents would go and visit him in the hospital, I would often tag along and I'd bring N64 magazine with me so that my brother could have something to read in there, as there wasn't much else to do in hospitals back then, because remember, you know, this was in the days when the internet was really just getting started, and so, you know, sitting in a hospital bed with an iPad was never going to be something that could happen. Now I remember showing my brother BanjoKazooie reviews and them giving the game amazing scores, and so when my dad asked my brother if there was anything he wanted to help make him feel better, no surprises, he said BanjoKazooie. And so I was tasked with picking up a copy to take to the hospital so he could use a children's ward TV to connect to our N64 console to play it. Now if there's one thing I'll always remember about my dad, is that he would always try to do anything that he could to make us happy with that type of thing. And finally, Goldeneye. I mean, it's Goldeneye, so I don't think you need me to tell you anything more than I have countless memories of death matches and changing match settings to create some weird and wonderful gameplay setups. Goldeneye was always special, though, because it was probably one of the last multiplayer games which I would have friends come over to play before the group of friends I used to game with all kind of started growing up and drifting into different interests, and so that's also one thing I'll always remember about Goldeneye. And so there you have it. There's probably some random memories thrown in here, but when it comes to the N64, that's all I can remember about my dad. I would have loved to have been able to ask him some of his own memories, but in the years I've been doing this, I never thought I'd be able to do that, and it's one of those things that I'd never get around to doing. You know, it's funny because on the one hand I'd love to have known what he remembered about the N64, But at the same time, I also wonder if he'd have been able to remember any of these because, you know, for him it may have just been another day, but for me it was obviously part of my childhood. But I really don't think he realised the impact it would have on me growing up. As depressing as I thought this was going to be, it's actually made me smile a bit today. And who knows, maybe one day, some other time, I'll do a non-N64 related memories video, and I'll go back to the old days of the NES, the Sega Mega Drive era and onwards to see what other memories I can remember that we had gaming together over the years. And so for today's topic of conversation in the comment section, let me know your favourite N64 memories with your mum, your dad, your parent or guardian, or whoever helped shape your gaming life. And until next time.